All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about language as we go through and these last couple of lectures. And I just want to show you there's some stuff to finish off with happiness, but then there's there's just all this work that I've never really presented or put into slides, so I need to do that. And it's stuff that's come out of these courses. The students have done great things. I'm very excited about it. So let me talk about this one first. I think that's right. Okay, yeah. So some of these slides, these ones are all right. Some of the others might be a little raw as I try to get them to work. It's a slightly complex thing that I've made. All right. So this, I think this is kind of a really big deal, actually. So it's this observation that there are more positive words than negative ones, right? And that's sort of the broad story. But we'll go into it in depth, and it connects to a much bigger notion or observation that, and of course you'll have different reactions to this, but people in general, most of their interactions are positive, right? We're social creatures, so a lot of what we do is actually pretty positive. Now, you read the news or whatever, or you open up Twitter and you might think that's not really the case. But so there is, of course, a lot of negative stuff and a lot of conflict. But we also built cities and countries and things. I mean, we did bad things to each other in the process. Lots of awful things have happened, but we've kind of been generally a constructive thing. So there are tendencies to cooperate, right? So tendencies to be positive because you don't keep talking to each other otherwise. So in some ways you can sort of say it makes sense. But this hadn't really been observed for words, so okay, this guy. So it's going to be this paper. We published it, we got it into PNAS a few years ago. It ended up being one of the, I guess, the 100th of the top 100 most talked about papers for that year, according to Altmetric. It got a fair amount of press and so on. Not why we do it, but this is sort of zooming out a little bit. So how we behave, right? How we should behave, right? We've had a lot of plans for this. There's the family one where your mum or your dad or whatever, they tell you how you should behave. There's all this sort of local stuff. There's how the church tells you to behave. There's state and so on, and then some eggheads occasionally come up with big plans for societies. Someone else operationalizes it, of course. But then we have, we have everything from Jainism, where you're not allowed to touch anything because you're going to hurt some bacteria, right? Which is extreme veganism, by the way. No bacteria. That's like that's going to be hard. To this sort of thing. I don't know if there's another limiting case, but just selfishness. The self comes first, right? And then there's really everything in between, and then often all these other dimensions. And these are stories. These are ways that we are often very sure that this is going to be the best way to run a large society or a village or whatever it is. People get pretty convinced about these things. I have no idea, actually. I think it's really messy. That's a problem with science. So all the way across. So Jainism, right? So right? Not allowed to touch ants. Yep. Probably a pretty bad person, but there's a whole, show, that you can see with that sort of thing. Okay. So I'm going to say this too. So language is this great social. We're excited about Snapchat, right, or something like that. But language primarily is our great social technology. And it's very much a thing strapped on top of biology. I think it's like the 4th or 5th usage of having a thing that takes air and food in, right? Air is pretty important. That's food. And then there's food, and liquids. So it's got to do this, and then later on we sort of evolved this little chirpy bit. So did all these other animals and so on. But it's a kludge, right? It didn't come first. So it's this incredible invention, invented over and over in different ways, and it has this incredibly rich and beautiful thing. Money is another great invention, right? Because that's encoding belief in some abstract thing. It's an extraordinary, of course that's led to all sorts of trouble, just as language has, I suppose, as well. But these are these extraordinary things, I think. So stories through language, and then this is then just sort of really going back to the sort of atoms of it, all, what's the emotional content of language, just sitting there. As has been, as all these languages have evolved over time. So I said, we have this overall observation, and I'm going to show you that we looked at 10 languages. So Russian, Korean, Indonesian, Chinese, we have French, Spanish, Portuguese, English, who am I missing? I think of the others. So it's a real range. They're spread around the world, and in the sense that, languages are spread around the world, they have different origins and so on, but also in terms of who evaluated these languages for us. So for instance, Portuguese is Brazil, right? So we had that evaluated by people in Brazil. People in Mexico evaluated Spanish, so they rated the word Mexico very highly. So, there's going to be some variation depending on who's rating things. Who else? I know I'm missing a couple. German, if I didn't say German. Oh, and Arabic, right. So we had Arabic, and that was Egypt. Right. Anyway, I'll have a map of that. So lots of different things. So maybe just think about how you think those languages might lay out in terms of their emotional content, in terms of their words. Which ones have maybe more or less positive, negative words. It's interesting because, people I've asked over the years, people have pretty strong opinions about, not their language, of course, but some other country's language, some other language. Obviously, that one will be. That's not how we approach this, of course. Okay, so as I said, we've got English. That's what we started with LabMT, and then we added 9 other languages. This was a pretty big enterprise. So we're moving away from Mechanical Turk, because Mechanical Turk, I don't know if it's changed, but for a long time, and certainly probably still true, it was only people in the US or in India could rate, or could work on Mechanical Turk. And that's I know I said this, but it's, the thing runs around the clock, and it was a payment issue and so on. So, but we did try, I think, to start with, as I recall, we did try, say, putting Spanish on LabMT, but there just simply weren't enough users to, get involved at the time. And then we were really going to struggle with some of the others. So, okay, so we used, and I'll have it, but we used a translation service. And so we paid a lot more than we would for Mechanical Turk. It was well funded. And so people who were involved in this had to answer a whole bunch of questions, quite difficult ones. Like, actually for English, we tried it, and it was like, oh, you have to really, really concentrate, right? You had to be able to, comprehension had to be strong and so on. So you had to be a reasonably sophisticated speaker, because it was based in this, it's based really in getting people to help translate things. All right, so here's the difficult beast that's sort of floating around all these things is scale, and it's the word usage frequency is sort of the mass, if you like, for our word animals. And so we have to kind of acknowledge that. We have to think about that. So that's something we took great pains to analyze. Maybe you're just an unwell beast. It's just unwell. Okay. So here's this sort of first thing that we see. So we've been using these words to make this hedonometer, and that's an instrument, and that's fine. And then this is stepping back to just look at what's, forgetting about that thing. Let's just look at these evaluations of words. And here's just a histogram. This is, again, there's 10,222 words we have for English, and that was, again, these 4 corpora: Twitter, Google Books, Music Lyrics, and the New York Times. So they're different things, and but we took the top 5,000 words over some span of time for Twitter and 20 years for the New York Times and so on. So there's some scope there, of course, there has to be. But they're commonly used words. So we have that. And once you get out to 5,000 words, you're getting out to some, not misspellings, but you're certainly getting out into the vocab a little bit. I think it's around 150 to 200 words. If you take a book, 150 to 200 words comprises, the lexicon will comprise half of the words in the book, right? And 6 words comprise 20%. Zipf's law, we know about this. So this seems to be consistent with this Pollyanna thing, that there is and maybe I didn't say that word, but the Pollyanna hypothesis that people tend to express, not just in language, but in interactions of all kinds, more positive than negative kinds of interactions. So this seems to be what's kind of going on, but then we have to look, well, maybe we've got a whole mixture of rare words and commonly used words, and so we have to tease that apart. Right, this idea that interactions, and so this goes back many decades in psychology, looking at small observational studies, generally speaking. And so here's a kind of a big data thing that we've been able to add to that. I think a useful thing to think about here, we didn't analyze this fully, and I know I've probably said this, but we have many words where we have a positive anchor and then we have a negative version of it, right? I mean, we have prefixes for this, right? Dis, meaning bad, right? Disaster is one of my favorite words, right? Disaster is bad star, right? Yeah. So I mean, it's like a bad omen, yeah. So we have those sort of mal, dis, un. So all these positive words, we create the negative version of it. But if you say something like, I'm not unhappy, that doesn't bring you back, right? These two negatives don't bring you back to happy. It's like sort of neutral. Like that's not terrible, right? So there are funny things that happen with those pieces. And I mean, if we kept building this thing and we're able to do that, well, I think it would be really fantastic to have all those 2 grams and 3 grams, and right. Okay, so that kind of gives us a taste of this. If we step back and say, oh, I guess that is sort of true. Like, we do have an anchoring in the positive, and we tend to, frame the negative as the opposite of the positive. It's not always true, right? I mean, we have some words that just are distinctly negative, and they don't necessarily have an obvious, like murder, for example, is just a bad word, and it's a bad act, and it doesn't have. I mean, you could describe something that's the opposite to it, but it's not the same as happy and unhappy. But we don't say unsad, right? Unless we're in Orwellian doublespeak. Double plus on good, right? I think is the. Okay. This is Anna Karenina, right? This is the opening line. It gets translated in various different ways, but it's been distilled into this kind of very simple thing. So all happy families are alike, and each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So this connects in here because while there's less out here, there's more variation, right? And we saw that with emotions, right? There are 4, thought to sort of generally held to be 4 main negative emotions, 1 sort of positive one, and then surprise is this other dimension. So negativity can be multifaceted, and so this is what Jared Diamond uses, right, for his stories about why some places take off and so on. It's not unreasonable. It's always seemed to be not unreasonable. Anyway, but this is right. The Anna Karenina hypothesis or effect or phenomenon is a concept, right? So there you go. Let's see. I think I made this link properly. Yeah, right. It's a whole principle. Yeah, lots of excitement there. Although much less than is written about this than the Winchester football. Okay. That's a very odd thing to me. Like, I mean, Wikipedia, I love Wikipedia, but just that variation in length, like the page on metaphor. Metaphors is an incredibly important thing. It goes on for a little bit, but there's much more about, the 4th Star Trek convention and whatever. Okay. I mean, this is a giant principle. You can argue about whether it's true or not, but it's a huge concept for systems in the world. Shut up, bunny. Sad little thing. It's dead. Should get Pratchett in here to hold it. Yeah.